Hello, and welcome to the second video in our three-part series on the sexual development of children. In the first video, we saw that sexual development is nothing like other kinds of development. Normality is defined by American politicians and therapists rather than by developmental or anthropological researchers, and the only reason for understanding sexual development is so we can prevent children from becoming abnormal sex monsters. That's why this video series focuses mostly on abnormal, or inappropriate, development. Now about the word inappropriate. In other contexts, it would indicate a social judgment that something is out of place in a particular situation, or that it is immoral. But when it comes to sexual development, inappropriate is a precise scientific term. It doesn't mean immoral. It means just plain wrong. So we know it must be unhealthy, abnormal, dangerous, and abusive. As scientists know, all five of these terms mean exactly the same thing. We used to use the term perverted, but that's out of date now. In those days, we called masturbation abuse, but we don't make that kind of mistake anymore. Anyway, this video will explain the 6 ways that sexual development can be inappropriate. All of them are dangerous and require serious intervention from abuse therapists and sometimes police. The first kind of inappropriate development is precocious sexual behavior. American therapists say that sexual behavior among children is normal only if it is limited to looking at each other's genitals, or perhaps only briefly touching them. We of course ignore anthropological and developmental research finding that children often have extensive sexual feelings, desires, and fantasies, and that children vary widely in behavior due to individual and cultural differences. We ignore findings that some children's behavior is quite advanced, including mutual masturbation, oral genital contact, and attempted coitus, especially in cultures that allow children to learn about and practice sexual behavior. We ignore findings that such behavior is not necessarily harmful. Is it possible that sexual development is similar to other kinds of development, and that it may be natural for some children to behave in more sexually advanced ways than others? No, certainly not. The therapists assure us that there is no variation among normal children, except that many exhibit no behavior at all, which is the healthiest. So, precocious sexual behavior is abnormal. We call it intrusive and aggressive, even if both children are willing and there is no aggression. Of course, when we're talking about non-sexual behavior, it would be inaccurate to refer to precocious behavior as intrusive and aggressive, but it is perfectly accurate in the field of sexuality. Now let's move on. The second way sexual development can be inappropriate is when behavior is frequent. Again, there is no variation among normal children. It's normal if a child puts a lot of time into sports, hobbies, or his or her social life, even if it takes away from time spent on other things, like schoolwork. But sexual development is different. It just is. Third, normal children always stop their sexual behavior when adults tell them to. Just like they always stop doing anything else when they're told. And the studies by therapists prove it. There's no chance that after being scolded for sexual behavior, normal children continue doing it in secret. Fourth, above-average knowledge is abnormal. It would be bizarre indeed to say that above-average knowledge in other areas is pathological and dangerous, that ignorance is desirable, and that anyone who argues otherwise is dangerous or evil. But again, sex is different. Normal children don't vary in their feelings or knowledge. They don't figure out sexual acts on their own, never mind the anthropological research. Normal children don't try to learn about adult sexual behavior. And normal older kids sure don't tell them, even though they do when it comes to non-sexual things. So precocious knowledge is clearly pathological. Fifth, unlike in other areas of development, annoying or aggressive behavior is abnormal. If a child's physical or social behavior causes complaints or emotional distress from other children, parents almost always handle this by themselves because they know that normal children need to be taught how to be considerate of others. Obviously this cannot be true with sexual behavior, because it is so much worse. As the experts tell us, annoying or aggressive children are essentially the worst of the worst, and require special, intensive, treatment, as well as contacting child protective services and law enforcement, who can enforce healthy development by removing children from the home and arresting them. After all, normal children are born with the knowledge that they simply cannot ever annoy or hurt others through sexual behavior like they do in non-sexual situations. Normal children are also born with the knowledge that they cannot do sexual things with children who are less knowledgeable, smaller, weaker, or younger, even though they can interact with such children when it comes to other things. Like the American politicians and therapists, normal children know more than the anthropological researchers, who have the silly idea that in sex, as in most other things, older children teach younger ones, and it is not necessarily aggressive. So children who do sexual things with unequal children need to be labeled as aggressive, exploitive, and predatory. Again, they are the worst of the worst and need serious intervention by abuse therapists and law enforcement. So, these are the 6 kinds of sexual behavior problems. Because they are all disturbing to us, we know that they may lead children to become molesters, if they aren't already. Therefore we must lump them together in one category, and refer to them as inappropriate behavior, problems with touching, abusive behavior, and molestation. It's good to use such precise terms that leave out the word sexual, because you don't want to be too clear when you're talking about sex. Everyone knows what we're talking about anyway. After all, we'd never use the word abuse when we're talking about physical or emotional aggression among children. That kind of aggression is not so bad, and doesn't need such negative condemnation like sexual behavior does, because, well, sex is really bad. Children need to learn that if they ever have a desire to sexually touch someone else, they are abnormal and dangerous in a way completely different from normal children who may be aggressive sometimes. With all this talk about what is normal and appropriate without relying on developmental research, you may think that what we're really talking about are moral and cultural rules. Well, you'd be wrong then. I can't imagine what would give you an idea like that. So we definitely know what normal sexual behavior is. But we just can't figure out why children do abnormal sexual things. Could it be that sexuality is similar to other aspects of life? Would that make inappropriate behavior understandable? No, certainly not. Abnormal sexual behavior must remain inexplicable. We also can't figure out why more and more children are being caught doing inappropriate things. Could it be that natural sexual behavior has been redefined as pathological? Could it be that there is a conflict between how children really develop, and how politicians and therapists want them to? No, certainly not. After all, this has never happened in other areas of mental health, and it would especially not happen in the area of child sexuality, which is so thoroughly researched and rationally discussed. We must adhere to our certain knowledge of normal sexual behavior at all costs. Anyone who questions this must have evil motives. Fortunately, we don't need to understand why children act abnormally in order to make them behave normally. That is the topic of the next video. Be sure to watch it to learn about the scientifically based and humane sex treatment given to children to control their behavior. Thank you for watching.